jurors and alternates all have returned. And Mr. Durst is here with Mr. Chesnoff. I'm excusing Mr. DeGuerin. And Mr. Miata is at council table. I understand there will be reading of transcripts from the Gavelston trial.
Yes, that's going to take up the rest of this afternoon, Your Honor. And the first witness...
tomorrow as well.
We're taking one
we have half a day.
The first witness is going to be Klaus Dillman, and this is testimony from the Gavelston trial. His testimony was given on September 23rd, 2003, and September 29th, 2003. The judge presiding over that particular case was the Honorable Susan Chris. That role is going to be read by Cameron Young, one of our students, law students. I'm assuming Mr. Chesnoff is going to be reading the part of Dick DeGuerin. You're Dick today?
I am.
Okay.
Big boots to fill.
The part of Klaus Dillman will be read by Benjamin Hariri. I'm probably butchered the pronunciation. And the portion of the prosecutor, Kurt Sistrunk, will be read by Michelle Cornelius. So if you guys can come on up.
And Your Honor, for the exhibit handling, it'll be average urethra. Could you spell that out?
G-I-R-I-T-H.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
G-I-R-I-T-H-A-R-A-N.
Thank you.
And Your Honor, both sides have agreed that Mr. Dillman is deceased.
Mr. Dillman is deceased. Very well.
And Your Honor, as we discussed earlier, I have a transcript. I guess we'll be marking this as a court's exhibit again. I think it's court 7.
Correct.
Yes.
You ready?
Board ready.
All right, you may proceed.
All right. Klaus Dillman, having first been duly sworn, testifies as follows. First question by Mr.
Explain
Sister.
afterwards.
Good morning, sir. Would you please spell and state your full name for the record?
Say it again.
Would you please state your full name and spell it for the record, please, sir?
Klaus Dillman, first name Klaus, K-L-A-U-S, Dillman, D-I-L-L-M-A-N-N.
Thank you, sir. And do you reside here in the city of Galveston?
That's correct.
And what type of business are you in, Mr. Dillman?
I own rent properties.
And specifically, do you own a rent property at 2213 Avenue K, Galveston, Texas?
That's correct.
And how long have you owned that property?
I would have to guess this one probably 5 or 6 years.
In getting to the crux of the matter here, do you recall renting your property out there, one room, to a Mr. Morris Black?
Yes.
Okay, do you have a personal recollection as to when you rented that apartment to Morris Black?
It must have been the year 2000 in the fall.
And would that have been in the form of a verbal agreement or a written agreement, sir?
Written.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as States Exhibit 1, and ask if you recognize these as documents associated with your agreement with Mr. Black.
It looks like it.
Does that refresh your memory as to the exact day that you made that rental?
Okay, I can look at the date here. It would be the date 8/15/2000.
Okay. And was your rental agreement with Mr. Black such that he would pay month to month or on a yearly basis, or what was the nature of the agreement?
It was a month-to-month lease with the duration of the lease at 1 year. It was a 1-year lease, but it would be paid monthly.
And I understand that the amount of that was $310. Is that correct? $310 per each?
I believe so.
Do Do you recall what other tenants you had in the home at that time when he moved in?
Yes, there was, number 4 was a lady by the name of Miss Conaway.
All right, sir. Apartment number 3 was a family living by the name of Henriquez. The first names of the two were, I believe, were Virgil and Maria Henriquez. Then, of course, the other 2 efficiencies were leased to Mr. Black and, at the time, Ms. Signer. I'm sorry, we misspoke. So, all right, sir. And then you go into.
Yeah. Apartment number 3 was a family living by the name of Henriquez. The first names of the 2 were, I believe, were Virgil and Maria Henriquez. Then, of course, the other 2 efficiencies were leased to Mr. Black and, at the time, Miss Signer.
Okay, and when you say,
That microphone, okay? So pull it a little closer to you and speak slowly and clearly into that microphone. All right. Go ahead.
okay, and when you say at the time, are you indicating that Ms. Signer was in the apartment in August of 2000, also in your home? Do you recall? Would you like to refresh your memory?
I would have to look at the lease to be precise.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification, States Exhibit 2. Would you take a look at that to see if that refreshes your memory as to when that agreement with Ms. Signer was made?
Yeah, this was the date.
For the record, sir, the date you entered into the agreement,
I'm sorry?
for the record, the date that you entered into that agreement with Ms. Signer.
Was on there.
Okay, I can't speak for you. The evidence has to come for you.
Okay. What it says here, November the 16th,
Of which year, sir?
2000.
So Ms. Signer moved in November 2000, sometime after Mr. Black had moved into the apartment.
Yes.
Can you just, for the jury, briefly describe the layout of the house and how the apartments were set up? Were they different in size and things like that?
There were 2 efficiencies. The size was roughly the same. The only difference, I think, was one had a shower and the other had a bathtub, but they were similar. Both of them,
Do you recall which one
in size,
had the shower and the bathtub?
they didn't have both. They had
They didn't have both?
one or the other.
Okay, which apartment did you lease out to Mr. Black?
The one with the shower.
And what number?
Number 1.
Apartment number 1. Okay. And the apartment that you rented in November, then to Ms. Signer, was apartment number what?
Number 2.
Just backing up a little bit to Morris Black again, was there any particular instructions he was given as to whether he was to pay you on a monthly basis? When were you expecting the rent to be due?
Usually stipulated on the contract, it's usually due on the 1st, and they usually had a grace period of 5 days, which is also in the contract. That was the grace period, 5 days. After the 5th, it would be late. The rent would be late.
Okay, do you have personal recollection as to how Mr. Black made his payments to you, whether it was traveler's checks or cashier's checks?
It was mostly by personal check.
Personal check, okay. And do you recall anything particular about these checks that you would receive from Mr. Black that caught your attention, so to speak?
Well, except for the fact that he made different notes and put them on the check, but otherwise it was nothing peculiar to be recorded on that one. I said that there was nothing that took special attention.
When you said he made notes on the checks, was that writing just all over the check or any particular thing?
Well, he was writing on top of the check. He would be writing different things. I really don't remember anymore. It just looked a little odd writing all those things on the check. But I don't really remember the details. You would have to have a copy of it and look for yourself.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever have any problem with him paying late, or was he always timely in his payments?
No, he was very particular paying on time, actually before time. He stressed always that he would be rather paying before it's due than after, and so he did. He always paid 2, 3, 4 days in advance.
And he made it clear to you that that's the way he wanted to do business with you.
Yeah, he didn't want, he had this thing about owing money to anybody, and he wanted to make sure I got the rent on time.
Mr. Black's apartment, can you describe it? Was it a one-room, a two-room, a combination?
Well, it's one of that old buildings that converted. It was an efficiency, and the kitchen was rather large, almost as large as the living room. There was 2 rooms with a shower.
Was there any physical door separating the kitchen area
There was no door, it was just an opening.
and then a restroom?
And then a restroom which was adjacent to the shower, next to the shower.
Did the apartment have both electric and gas, or do you recall?
It had both electric and gas.
Do you know if Mr. Black ever connected the gas, or was that something that you were responsible for, utilities? How did that work?
No, normally they would all pay their own utilities. That would include gas and electricity, and that's what I would be responsible for. Except for Mr. Black, he never did have his gas turned on.
And the hot water heaters for those apartments, were those individual or a common hot water heater?
They were individual, they belonged to the apartment, so you had to have it turned on from the gas company to have hot water.
So Mr. Black never had hot water.
Never did.
Did you have much interaction with Mr. Morris Black while he was in your apartment there?
Mostly about complaints. He would call me.
He would call you complaining on others, or people would call him, or about complaining about him, or both?
No, he usually would let me know what's going on, the complaints. Usually it would be complaints, what he didn't like, and he kept me very informed this way, that what was going on. Mostly it was from what he didn't like.
And did it have to deal with other tenants in your home, or other...
Yeah, mostly other tenants.
And do you recall what type of things he would complain about? Any recollection?
Well, he would say the door wasn't locked, the dryer is too loud, they've been running the washer or dryer too late, making too much noise, and so on.
Would he share with you anything that he did in response to those things that were causing him problems? Did he ever take action on his own that you were made aware of?
Well, he told me he always what he didn't like, so I usually tried to calm him down, say, well, this is the way it should be or shouldn't be, and that he was to somehow fit in and interact with the proper way with the other residents in the building.
And you said, I noticed you said, try to calm him down. Is it fair to say he got pretty excited about too much noise, or...
Well, Mr. Black had a tendency to always raise his voice a little bit more than normal. My assumption was that maybe it was because he was up to 71 years old and he was hard of hearing. And even when he called me, usually he called me by telephone, he would always have a loud voice, raises his voice always. But I got used to that. I mean, I figured he was maybe a little bit deaf or something. So that's what happens sometimes when people get a little older. But I didn't make anything special out of it.
Let me ask you, did you receive other complaints from your tenants then regarding his actions in any particular fashion?
I don't remember offhand. It could have been that Mr. Henriquez mentioned something one time, but I am not sure. I think it was more after the fact that he told me that it was a problem there with the washer and the dryer, but I knew this already from Mr. Black himself.
And when you say knew it from Black, are you referring to the noise that the washer and dryer made that...
Yeah, he turned on the washer or turned them off. Like at 8 or 8:30, he would say it's too loud. He would just turn off the dryer or the washer or whichever. Sometimes he moved the clothes around, this or that. Said they should have more clothes in the washer or in the dryer. Why they wasted energy, or he made, of course, noise about it because he was bothered by the fact that the laundry, the washer, and dryer were going, because he took his bed from the living room where the bed is supposed to be into the kitchen, and that bed was right next to the laundry, the wall, right on the wall next to the laundry. And that's why it caused the noise was a little bit more pronounced. And I had advised him several times, why do you not just take the bed and put it where it belongs in the living room, in this case, since this is an efficiency? But he was always concerned about costs, and so he, particularly in the cooler time of the year, he would just have a blanket in the opening. put a blanket in the opening and would just basically live in the kitchen
And that was to take advantage, I guess, of the
to save money.
heat.
On the heating, because he had no gas, or he used probably his burner or electrical heating.
So this washroom then was common to anyone who wanted to come down. It was in between what apartments in your home?
Anybody that lived there that were able to have access.
Its physical location, though, was it in between which two apartments?
The washer and the dryer?
Yes, sir.
Well, it was right next to the wall where he put his bed.
Okay. And what distance separated apartment 1 from apartment number 2? How much distance would you estimate were between apartment number 1, the door to apartment number 1, and the door to apartment number 2?
Just a few feet, and the hallway was 4 or 5 feet, and the door from Mr. Black was just a little farther down from the door of Miss Signer, which I would say 5 feet maybe down, and it was 4 or 5 feet.
Okay.
I never measured it, but I would have to guess it.
Did he ever make any complaints to you about the outside porch light?
Well, he had that thing about electricity, and even so, I told him that I would give him $10 off from his rent for the outside lights, which were low-draining, low-wattage lights that would go on in the evening and go out automatically in the morning. He was not satisfied with his bill, or he was suspicious if he got the right deal or whatever. I don't know what it was exactly that made him to check on the breaker box to see which light belonged to him, what he is paying for, what he is not paying for. Mr. Black was a very suspicious man. He didn't trust anybody. If he trusts anybody, I don't know, but he was very, very suspicious of anything.
Was he also suspicious of you?
Yes, of course, suspicious.
In what way?
Well, he felt maybe I didn't treat him fair, or I charged. I had too much hanging on that light meter, or he paid too much. So I explained to him later on too. I said, "Listen, you pay $10 less, and the lights actually don't take more than $4, $5, $6 a month." So he still got a deal, but it was not. I don't think he believed me.
Did you ease his concerns in any way when you reduced his rent by $10, or did he continue to complain about the light?
Well, not to me, but it's obvious that when he was trying to go around to the breaker and turn off the other people's electricity, and in one particular case, Miss Conway's breaker must have forgotten to put it back on again or whichever, but he still was probing around. He was suspicious that he didn't get what was supposed to be coming to him, that he paid too much for his electricity. He figured the light on his meter he was paying for, he shouldn't be paying for.
Mr. Dillman, under the terms of your contract, were there any provisions made for you to have access to those apartments?
Yes, for various reasons.
Maintenance and such as that?
That's correct.
Just to check and make sure things are okay. All right. Was there any set routine to when you might check in on those apartments, or did it just come after you have been given notice of a problem?
After I had been given notice of a problem.
And was it your nature to take steps to check in on those matters in either morning or afternoon, or just whenever it was convenient for you?
No, if it was a very important problem, anything major, of course, I would have access right away. But usually somebody would have called me and would let me know, and then that particular person usually would be the one who has the problem, would let me in. But in general, I like to catch somebody, the resident. If I had something to do, I would sometimes catch them here or there and tell them that I need to have to see the apartment to have entry in.
At some point after Mr. Black moved into your home, do you recall coming into contact with anyone who described themselves as the brother-in-law of the lady who wanted to see about renting apartment number 2 from you?
What are you asking about?
I'm asking you, how did it develop that you rented apartment number 2 to a Dorothy Signer?
Well, somebody called me.
And how did they represent themselves to you?
As far as I remember, always as the brother-in-law or friend in the beginning, probably. The first time I had contact with that person was probably, he said, a friend or whatever. Later on, it was the brother-in-law mostly.
And did that person offer you any description of the characteristics or condition of Miss Signer who was interested in renting this apartment?
No, the first time he would say that he had a friend that he would be interested in renting this apartment, the efficiency.
Did you ever have a face-to-face meeting with the friend, the brother-in-law?
Only from a distance mostly, never close up.
Would that have been after the rental agreement was signed or before?
After the rental agreement was signed, later on.
Who, in fact, did you execute the contract with then? Was it the brother-in-law or Dorothy Signer?
Dorothy Signer.
And where did that take place?
In the apartment.
And did Dorothy Signer present herself as someone who could speak with you, or what did you learn once you met Miss Signer?
She was mute and she communicated, so she was writing down everything on a sheet of paper.
And do you recall how soon it was before you executed the contract, or was that all on the same day you met her and you did the contract?
The same day.
Okay. And in comparison to Mr. Black's apartment, what type of apartment did Dorothy Signer have? Larger one, smaller one, same size?
Like I said earlier, they seemed to me pretty much the same. I never took measurements, except for one had a shower and the other had a bathtub. Maybe the bath was a little larger.
Do you recall if they had the same carpet in each?
Carpets were the same also, I think.
Carpet?
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you this. Earlier you spoke about Mr. Black's utilities. Did Miss Signer give you any indication how she wanted to handle her utilities?
Well, at first we agreed she would be paying her own utilities, and then later on she contacted me and said if it's really not a big bother, she would rather have me take care of the utilities.
And why did you avoid routinely in your previous, if you did, why did you not want to be responsible for utilities, just for the record?
Well, that's the way I usually rent apartments. Everybody is responsible to their own utilities.
Did you remember the payment you agreed upon with Miss Signer originally, given that she would be responsible for the utilities, how much she was to pay?
No, we never talked exactly how much it would be, except when it came to she wanted me to take care of it. She said whatever it is, she would be paying it, and if it's more, she would be paying more, and that was that. Under the circumstances at the time, I thought I could see a good reason why she would not want to take care of going to the gas company, calling the gas company or the electric company and get gas and electricity in her own name. Because if she's mute, I guess it creates a problem at times, I would think.
Again, I am showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit number 2. Do you recognize this as the contract you executed with Dorothy Signer?
Yes.
Mr. Dillman, could you tell the jury again the date of execution of this contract? When was the lease to begin?
November 16th, 2000.
And what amount of security deposit was required?
It was $300, and that's what it states here.
Okay. And the rental amount to be paid on a monthly basis?
On a monthly basis.
And how much was that rental amount?
It must have made a mistake here. This says 300, but here it says 310.
Okay. What were you collecting from Miss Signer? This says security deposit, now 300. Is there a difference between security deposit and rental?
Oh, I'm sorry. The security deposit was 300 and the rent was 310. Collecting, I was including the utilities. It was collecting 400.
So you agreed then to keep the utilities and not have her put them in her name?
That's exactly right.
And on the last page of this contract, how was it signed? By which individuals?
Well, it was me and Dorothy Signer.
Okay. Regarding the method of payment, you testified earlier that Morris Black paid by personal check. How did you receive your payments from Miss Signer? Do you recall if it was a personal checks, or traveler's checks, or money orders?
It was money orders.
And was it always money orders?
I believe so.
And was that payment something that you received on a monthly basis, or was there some other agreement?
Bi-monthly.
So she paid double the amount, paid for 2 months.
That's correct.
Did Miss Signer cause you or your tenants any problems that you became aware of?
No.
Do you recall how many times you saw her at the home there, apartment number 2?
2 or 3 times.
And what was the nature of those visits or occasions?
First time when we signed the contract, the second time must have been a plumbing problem or something. It was a maintenance call.
And on both of those occasions, well, I guess the second occasion after the contract, she still represented herself to you as Miss Signer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I believe you said that you saw her brother-in-law, or who was supposed to be her brother-in-law, after the contract was also executed at some point?
Well, very much later on.
Okay. And was that just in passing, or was that a discussion?
It was one time when he was walking across the street, and he came from the apartment, from the building going across the street, and I thought it was him. At the time, he was standing on the porch, but I was at least about 15 feet or so away, so it was relatively far. I didn't really get that close a look. I never was very close up to Mr. Durst.
But you think you saw this brother-in-law individual 2 or 3 times?
2 or 3 times.
At what point did you gather that Miss Signer was really not a lady? When did that come to your attention that you knew Miss Signer was not a lady?
Newspapers.
Are you referring to after?
After the fact.
After the fact? And the fact being the death of Morris Black?
Yeah, after the fact.
Okay. And you had occasion to see the defendant, Mr. Durst, before today, have you not? On more than one occasion.
I'm sorry?
Have you seen Mr. Durst before your testimony today? Have you had an opportunity to see him on more than one occasion?
Yeah, when I was here the last time.
And you've previously testified, have you not, to the relationship between Miss Signer and the brother-in-law and Mr. Durst? Do you recall?
Yes, I recall a relationship there.
Based on what you've seen of these 3 individuals that have represented,
2 individuals.
these 2 individuals, Miss Signer and the brother-in-law, any doubt in your mind as to who Miss Signer was and who the brother-in-law was?
Well, Mr. Durst was very convincing as Miss Signer. I mean, I still am not able to even say if that's the same person. Obviously, it is, but as I indicated before, you have to dress him up in the same outfit.
So the defendant convinced you, I gather, that he actually was a woman.
Well, now I don't know, of course. Yeah, I mean, you got to, but what I'm saying here is only this, that Miss Signer was a very convincing middle-aged woman.
Okay.
So take it from there.
Did the defendant in any capacity, whether brother-in-law or Miss Signer, ever indicate to you that he had any type of problem with Morris Black?
No.
Did you make anything of that you had at least one neighbor that wasn't having a problem with Morris Black?
Well, if you have one neighbor you don't have any problems, you hardly ever see or would consider a good resident, I would say yeah.
So if you're a good resident, you are referring to that.
A good resident is one you never see, yes.
And in this case, that would be the defendant, Mr. Durst, correct?
That would be the defendant, Mr. Durst. In contrast to Mr. Black, yes, that was different, definitely so.
Back to Mr. Black for just a little bit. At some point, did you come to a time when you just felt it was time for Morris Black to move along, to get out of that apartment?
Well, it happened when he went to the electric box in the back and he was fooling around on the breakers of Miss Conway. That's when I finally decided, well, maybe it would be the best not to renew Mr. Black's lease. Miss Conway mentioned to me that if this is the new manager, Mr. Dillman, I will be moving soon.
And you made a choice to give notice to Mr. Black then to leave the apartment, correct?
I talked to him right away and I told to him that I gave him plenty of time, more time normally than what is stated on the contract. Like it's 1 month usually when you have intention not to renew the lease. I told Mr. Black that it would probably be best for everybody if you could start looking already for a new place to live.
Was that a verbal communication to Mr. Black, or did you also provide him written notice?
At this time, it was a verbal one.
Do you recall what month that was?
It was roughly about a month before I sent him the notice that I would no longer renew his lease, which by law I am obligated to do in written.
Under your contract, right?
Under the contract, yeah.
I'm showing you again, sir, what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 1. If I could refer you to the front page, do you recognize that as your eviction letter, so to speak, for Morris Black?
It's not an eviction letter, it's just a statement that I will not renew his lease. It's not an eviction. I am not a lawyer, but that's not an eviction.
This is your written notice to him that you would not be renewing his lease,
That's correct.
and also contained in your exhibit that you previously identified as the contract that you executed with Morris Black. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Dillman, if you would please, can I have the witness read this into the record?
Yes.
And just please start with a date and read the entire document that you sent him.
July 13th, 2001, Mr. Morris Black, 2213 Avenue K, Apartment 1, Gavelston, Texas, 77550. Dear Mr. Black, your contract to lease apartment number 1 at 2213 Avenue K expires August 14th, 2001. I will not renew your lease past that date. This letter will serve as written notice for termination as required by the contract.
Mr. Dillman, is there some reason you didn't hold him to that notice? Can you explain for us?
It is because he was a difficult resident. He was complaining constantly, calling me late hours and shouting into the telephone, which I explained already earlier that he probably had a hearing problem, but still it's on a regular basis. This was not the only reason I suggest for him to leave, of course. It was because of the run-in with the other residents in the building that caused serious concern to me. And so I thought it might be the best for all concerned that he start looking for another apartment.
And the run-in with the other residents, you were referring to what you previously testified about, switching the breaker box and things like that.
Well, the breaker box he didn't tell me, but he told me he was probing around, that I heard from, of course, Mrs. Conway.
Okay.
But 95% he would tell me himself that he didn't like and that he had a run-in with this person or with that person and what the problem was.
So other than Miss Conway then, you are learning from Morris Black himself the problems that he caused.
Oh yeah, he was generous with his opinion, yes.
I understand from what you've just read that you told him that lease was going to terminate, I believe, on August 14th of 2001?
That's correct.
It's plain from what we know that he was not
He has not left.
out by August 14th. If you recall, for what reason did you allow him to stay beyond that date, beyond August 14th, 01?
Well, he was promising that he would find something, and he told me that he hasn't found anything and that it would be okay instead of the 14th if he could stay up until the 1st. I think it was September, wasn't it? Yeah, I believe so, the 1st of September. And then from there on, he still, after the 1st of October, I got that note that he would be staying. He sent me another check.
You received another check in October for October's rent?
Yeah, before. It was 2 or 3 days before, let's say 26th to 27th. He always happened to send those checks relatively early, so I didn't quite understand what the situation was. He said in that note that he would be moving. I got you. I think it was something like that. I got your message and I will be moving. That's what he said, something in that respect. So if he would be moving, I thought, why would he send me another check? So I forgot, well, maybe he's a little confused, so I was going to talk to him about it, but I never had a chance.
Let me ask you this. Do you recall if the October rent came in the form of a personal check with a writing on it, or if it came in the form of some type of cashier's or traveler's check?
It didn't come as a check. I think it came as a cashier's check with a note attached, which I just mentioned what the contents were.
Mr. Dillman, I'm showing you one individual page out of State Exhibit 150. And if you would, could I ask you to step down, please, in front of the jury, and as we show the jury the top check on that page, could you describe what that check shows, from whom to whom?
On the top of the check it says, this check is for $300. Then normally when you put the name, it says Klaus Dillman. Behind it is $300 with several X's. $300 written out. And then this is, underneath it, it says, this is for all. Can you make that out? Own. This is for all months. Maybe it's all months. It says, due now. I mean, it is hard to read on this one. Maybe you can make something out of it.
Who is it signed by, sir?
Morris Black.
Again, you were referring to the top of the check of this record. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And the writing that you previously testified to that Morris Black wrote on his checks, that's what you were referring to, the extra writing, so to speak.
That's correct.
Let me show you another check. If you would, please read what you are able to discern on that check had written at the top?
Well, it says was on top, this check is for $300. Then the normal writing of my name, $300, and a lot of X's behind it, $300 again. And then this is for all money I owe now until 2000. There's a number here, and then Morris Black.
Signed by Morris Black? Again, this check exhibits the same writing that you mentioned accustomed to on the checks that you received from Mr. Black?
Yes, sir.
I have one more, sir. The same question on this one, referring you to the third item down.
Yeah, the same thing again. This check is for so-and-so at 2213K, apartment 1, and then the usual amount.
Signed by Morris Black?
Morris Black.
I'm showing you another page. Are you able to read this or not?
I don't think so.
No? You're not? Okay. Thank you, sir. You may have a seat. But your memory is such that the October check came in the form of something other than a personal check, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Had you received any type of notice from Ms. Signer, the defendant, as to whether or not he was going to be leaving anytime soon because he decided to look for a new home, anything like that?
No.
You mentioned that you communicated at times with Ms. Signer through handwritten notes. Is that correct?
Miss Signer communicated to me with handwritten notes, note-wise version.
Thank you for correcting me on that. I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as States Exhibit 3, 4, and 5. Are you able to recognize these documents?
Yeah, they are.
It's communications you received from Ms. Signer?
That's correct.
Mr. Dillman, you gave Morris Black notice again in October, right? October of 2001, that he was going to be asked to leave.
It says here July 13th, 2001.
So it would have been August of 2001 that he was supposed to be out.
That's correct. No, actually, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was supposed to be.
And you mentioned that you received a note. Do you personally really remember whether or not you received that with a September payment, or you received that with an October payment? Do you still have that note?
No.
You mentioned some note.
No.
Do you remember if it came with the September payment or the October payment?
It was a lot of stuff ridiculously written, and I just threw it in the trash can. I didn't think I would need it one day.
Mr. Dillman, we made a copy of the original filing to see if this is any easier for you to read out of States Exhibit 150. Are you able to read?
I need it larger when you get my age, yeah.
I apologize. If you can't read it, I will just read it into the record.
Why don't you read it into the record, because I can't see. I would have to be guessing.
Regarding out of States Exhibit 150, Travelers Express MoneyGram, paid to the order of Klaus Dillman by Morris Black, address 2213 Avenue K, number 1. And the date written at the bottom says October rent. And I pass the witness with that, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Yes. Mr. Dillman, did I understand you to say that you also received a check from Morris Black with all of his writing over it for that same rent?
I only got one time an amount of what he owes.
Well, maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you said that on September the 26th, you received a check from Morris Black.
I thought it was a check, but I could have been mistaken. It could have been a money order.
Likewise, about the date, September the 26th, is there other evidence that the money order wasn't even bought until either October the 1st or September the 30th? Would that be? Do you have any records of when you actually received the check?
No.
Excuse me, the money order.
No.
Okay, let me go back to the beginning then. What I understood you to say is that you got a call from someone wanting to rent the apartment, right?
That's correct.
And that was from a man saying that his friend or sister-in-law wanted to rent the apartment.
That was what I understood a brother-in-law of Miss Signer.
He was the brother-in-law, and he said the sister-in-law wanted to rent the apartment.
Yes, that Miss Signer had a friend, a female friend, which was interested in the apartment vis-a-vis across the hall. He heard that this apartment would be vacant.
Okay, did the person that called you, did you recognize that voice later on as being the same person that called you several times about Miss Signer?
It seemed the same voice, Mr. DeGuerin.
Did you notice anything kind of unusual about the way the person, the man who called about Miss Signer, spoke?
Nothing unusual.
Well, by unusual, I mean, would you recognize a Texas accent as opposed to a New York City accent? Could you tell the difference?
Well, I certainly could tell a Texas accent.
It was not a Texas accent, was it?
And I could tell, well, New York is harder to tell for me.
And that's because your native language is German, right?
I have a capacity of the English language.
I have no problem with that. But my question is, do you know whether the person who called you sounded like they had a New York accent?
I didn't detect any such thing.
But it certainly wasn't a Texas accent, was it?
No.
Okay. Now, shortly after this person called you, this person said, Miss Signer will meet you at the apartment and sign the lease, right?
Are you talking about the beginning of...
Yes, the very beginning.
Yes.
And then you went to the apartment, 2213 Avenue K, number 2, and a woman showed up.
And a woman was standing on the porch.
Okay, and that woman had on a wig, or, well, that woman had long hair.
No, it was a shorter hair wig.
Not as short as yours.
Well, it would have made it much less for me, to be honest.
Would have made it, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, it would have made it much easier for me, to be honest.
Sure. Did you tell whether it was a wig or not?
Sure, but I couldn't tell. I really wasn't looking for a wig.
All right.
It was a nice coiffured hairdo. You know, they make some good wigs these days, you can tell. Unless you're really looking for it. I mean, I used to be in the business. I should know.
Used to have a wig business in Houston?
Oh, yes. I used to be in the business for 40 years, yes.
And did you make any kind of judgment about this woman that was wearing, by the way, what color was the wig?
It was frosted.
Frosted?
If you know what that is, highlights, they call it, I guess. Highlights, frosted, highlights.
We're going to start at the same time, aren't we?
It's frosted.
All right. Frosted, kind of like it was part blonde and part gray?
A darker color.
All right.
Let's put it this way, a little darker than frosted, okay?
Okay, well, did you think that the woman was attractive?
It wouldn't be my type.
Fair enough. If that's what you mean, if you were asking me, oh, that's you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If that's what you mean, if you're asking me, was it in general terms speaking attractive woman, I would say looked like a middle-aged woman with a flat bust, no bust, maybe it had a problem there too besides the muteness, and I wasn't going to go into that, of course. I felt sorry for the poor thing.
All right.
So when you ask me, did she look attractive to a man, I would say, well, if you like Mr. Black, well, I don't know really. I mean, Mr. Black had other problems, I think, than looking at women, and as far as looking attractive, no, I would say, well, maybe average. Wasn't my type. That's all I can tell you, okay?
Good enough. All right. Now, the next question has to do with what I take from you as you were pleased with Miss Signer as a tenant.
Very much so.
Number one, you didn't see her very much.
That's why.
And that's one good criteria of a tenant, as you say.
Yes, that's what I would consider good criteria.
And the very limited communication that you had with Miss Signer was in note form. And those notes were generally very pleasant, weren't they?
Very pleasant, controlled.
And I know you have seen them, and the jury has seen them, but they are not technically in the record. I want to just read them real quickly. Here states exhibit number 3. It says, Dear Klaus, enclosed is $1,000. Please apply to December and January rent and use the balance for my utility bills. Thank you, Dorothy Signer. That was the note she wrote, correct?
Correct.
And then the other writing on that piece of paper is actually your writing and how you figured out how to apply this, right?
Yeah, well, it was a little under the thoughts and how I had received the payments. I had already write it down so I know what I was getting and what I wasn't.
I think I understand that. What you are saying is it was more than was owed for rent and you applied it the way you thought.
That's exactly right.
Very good, thank you. Second one, State's Exhibit number 4. Dear Klaus, Sunday, enclosed is $1,200 for February, March, and April rent. I think that is correct, although I'm not sure about February. Then there's a circle around that and a note. I do remember now. I think I did pay towards February. Please apply to May.
That's exactly what I did.
Of course, because Miss Signer is paying you in advance for the rent.
She wanted to pay me for a whole year in advance, and I didn't want to have it that way.
Okay, and then at the bottom, the hot water stopped working today. Please repair. Let me ask you, that's a different tone of complaint than the kind of complaints you got from Morris Black, isn't it?
Yes.
It goes on, I hope all is well with you and I hope it stops raining. Yours, Dorothy.
Dorothy.
And then again, another note at the bottom, utilities. If I am not paying proper amounts, please tell me. Also, I hope it is okay that I've been leaving bicycle on porch.
Bicycle on porch. No, I forgot about that.
Well,
But I am sure it was there. I never seen a bicycle on the porch, though.
you didn't see it?
No, but I didn't drive by there every day, but it must have been one of those bicycles you don't see.
Okay, and then here's the last one. At least the last one that you kept, State's Exhibit 5. Dear Klaus, rent for May and June. Dorothy, Apartment 2, 2213 Avenue K. Were there other notes that you might have discarded?
Might have.
And those generally show the nice relationship you had with Dorothy Signer as a tenant. Isn't that right?
That is correct, if you can call it a relationship.
Well, in the way a landlord-tenant relationship.
Yeah.
Certainly I'm not inferring anything else.
Okay.
Now, at some point, you got some kind of information that Dorothy Signer's brother-in-law might be staying in the apartment, right?
I think she mentioned it before that, about somebody might be visiting her brother-in-law, if that's okay, if he can visit once in a while and stay in here for a short while. I think he had already that agreement right from the start.
So when you first met with Dorothy Signer, she let you know, I suppose with a note, that her brother-in-law might be staying in the apartment also.
Not staying on a constant basis, no. When I discussed in the beginning, I asked her if she needs anybody to help her with the furniture, the move, or anything I could do for her, and then we came into, she said no, she had a brother-in-law, I believe she said, and then later on she added if that would be okay if he comes by once in a while and stayed for a short time. That was the whole conversation about the brother-in-law altogether.
And although you're saying conversation, what you mean by that is Dorothy Signer was writing notes.
By communicating through writing things down, because Miss Signer was mute, and we communicated through a piece of paper.
Sure,
Because I didn't use a piece of paper.
we understand. Now, Miss Signer let you know that she would travel extensively from time to time and would not be there, right?
That's correct, Mr. DeGuerin.
And when she was not there, perhaps her brother-in-law might be there on a temporary basis.
I don't think he would. I don't know. I don't remember we would go into detail like this, but
Maybe not that detailed, but it was.
it wouldn't have mattered either way. I hardly ever seen her, and the brother-in-law I didn't see either. So I didn't see it was a concern of mine that he would be abusing the rent privilege.
Sure, you didn't want one person to be living there and then have 8 or 10 other people coming in and out.
Well, I knew right away they weren't
That wasn't happening.
the type of people that would do that.
Sure, but you did see a man who you believed to be Dorothy Signer's brother-in-law a couple of times, didn't you?
On the porch from afar, as I said, one time on the porch, one time I saw him walking across the street from about 30 or 40 away, but he was crossing the street, yes, and I recognized him then.
Did you have a conversation?
No, I didn't have any conversation. I only asked one time. I think once or twice I asked from far. We never stand close together. I mean, eye contact or anything like this. It was always from a distance.
Okay, I want to do something we've already done before the jury was selected, and we had some hearings. And I want you to take a look at Bob Durst. In fact, I will have him stand up here. Stand up, please, Bob. Take a look at Bob Durst. He looks like that man that you thought was Dorothy Signer's brother-in-law, doesn't he?
With the color of his hair, I think he had darker hair.
Well, he might have gotten a little grayer worrying about this, but
Maybe at the time he had darker hair. He didn't have gray hair.
look at him again. Can you imagine him with a frosted wig on?
No. You just put him on there, put the jumpsuit on, whatever he used, and the scarf and that wig, the whole thing, and then I say yes, 100%. Otherwise, I have to go with the 80.
80%?
Or they want to have some fun too. After all, it's costing quite an inconvenience here.
No, sir, not at all. I just want your best.
The best bet is that pretty close that comes to, that's the fact. It was
As I understand it, it's about 80%.
80%. I'm staying with that.
Okay, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. That's what you said, right? About 80%.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and of course, he looks a lot paler now than he did when you saw him, when you thought he was Dorothy Signer's brother-in-law, and he looks a lot paler than Dorothy Signer looked when you saw her, right?
That's correct.
Okay, now I want to bring into the court and have you identify a scale model of the apartment as well as a diagram. While I'm getting the diagram, I will ask for the scale model to be brought in. We've conversed with the prosecutor about this, Judge. I have marked the diagram as Defendant's Exhibit 7. I'll mark the scale model as Defendant's Exhibit 8. We would move to introduce it at this time for demonstrative purposes, Your Honor.
It's admitted for demonstrative purposes.
Your Honor, if we could have, just for recognition for the jury, that this is not to scale?
Actually, it is, and I can have that explained, but he doesn't know that.
Are you referring to the walls? Are you referring to the placement of the stove? Or are you referring that every item on that diagram is to scale?
Every item in the diagram, that's in the diagram, yes. The furniture is not in the diagram, but everything in the diagram is to scale. Mr. Dillman, if we can be heard over the movement here, there came a time recently, with your permission, some folks from my office came in and took some measurements of the apartment, right?
Right.
Take a look first at Defendant's Exhibit 7, which is the diagram, please, sir. And then take a look at Defendant's Exhibit 8, which is the scale model. They both fairly and accurately represent apartment number 2 at 2213 Avenue K, don't they?
Yes.
Thank you. When you saw apartment 2, 2213 Avenue K, it had in the living room a round table, an office chair, and a bed, didn't it?
Yeah, and the television, and then there was a little stand-up lamp in that corner.
A television set and a lamp, right?
That's correct.
And the stove and the sink and the refrigerator and so forth are properly placed along with the bathtub and the toilet, the sink, right?
That's accurate.
Okay, Morris Black, let me talk about him for a moment. Morris Black gave you problems, didn't he?
Gave me what?
Problems.
He was difficult, let's put it this way.
Did you require any kind of references or to previous landlords before he moved in?
No.
Did you know of any of the previous apartment buildings or duplexes or houses where he had lived in Galveston before he moved into your place?
He just told me that he owned a house and just sold it.
But did you know, that is, of any of the previous landlords? Did you talk to any of his previous landlords?
No.
Okay, did you ever talk to any of the people at Rosenberg Library about Mr. Black?
No.
He became difficult with the other tenants, at least with Miss Conaway and with the Enriquez's, didn't he?
He did.
This thing about going into Miss Conway, am I saying it correctly, Miss Conaway?
I believe so.
About going into Miss Conaway's breaker box and turning off her breakers, you had a conversation with Morris Black in which he explained to him that he wasn't getting billed for anybody else's electricity.
Yeah, I told him. I said, well, I had a conversation before, but not about the breaker box. No, this conversation was because of Miss Conway. She said if Mr. Black is going to be the manager from here on, I will be moving. And that's what she told me. So I said, Miss Conway, don't worry about it. I'll talk to Mr. Black and I will not renew this lease.
I understand that.
And that's what I did.
And what I'm talking to you about happened before the conversation with Miss Conway. By the way, Miss Conway works for UTMB, doesn't she?
I know she worked for the city at the time when she was moving. I don't know where she is working now.
Well, let me back up for a second. When Didn't Morris Black complain to you, thinking that lights in the hallway, the washing machine, lights on the porch, were all being billed to his electricity?
No, he just said the hall lights.
Okay. And he didn't believe you when you told him that it wasn't. Isn't that right?
Well, I don't think he believed. No, he didn't believe.
He was very suspicious of you, wasn't he?
Well, that's what I said before, yes. Very suspicious. I am a very suspicious fellow, right?
You told him nothing but the truth. Isn't that right?
Well, I treated him like I always run my businesses.
But nonetheless, he was always distrustful of you and anybody else that you saw him come into contact with, wasn't he?
I don't know about anybody else. As far as distrustful, I only can speak for myself. He was suspicious about everything. He didn't trust the world. He was...
You know the word paranoia?
I know the term, but I wouldn't be using it unless I would be a psychiatrist.
Well, you know that he had difficulty with Enriquez, don't you?
Well, he told me himself that he had a problem and he was taking out to do the washing or something.
And you knew he had difficulty with Ms. Conway?
Yes.
Both from what he said and from what Ms. Conway said, right?
Right.
In fact, let's get to this getting into the breaker box. What did it take physically for Miss Morris Black to get into Miss Conway's breaker box and turn off her electricity?
What are you asking me?
What did he have to do that?
Just walk back there and open the breaker box. It's not locked. I mean, anybody can go and just open the breaker box. I've never seen a breaker box locked with a latch and lock on it. All you do is pull down the breakers. And so I told him that from here on, this is the story, and I pay your light bill. From here on, I will have it in my name, and so you have no reason anymore. And the remaining time, you will be here in this apartment and have no reason to touch the breaker box again. And that was that. I don't think he did any more as long as he was living there.
Well, in the conversations you had with Ms. Conway, when she said something to the effect that if he is going to be the manager, I'm going to be leaving, did you get from that Ms. Conway thought Morris Black was the manager of the apartment?
No, she made it up herself. She just called him manager. It was just a phrase, I believe, she used.
Well, was Morris Black kind of acting like he ran the place?
Well, if you turn somebody's breaker box, go in somebody's breaker box and turn off the electricity, you would assume maybe it's the new manager and he's fixing some lights somewhere or something going on. I mean, you would come to that assumption, so I understand why she said what she said.
Sure. Well, let's look at that for a moment. Miss Conway lived alone, didn't she?
Occasionally, she had a daughter, I believe, come by and stayed for a little while with her.
But for the most part, she lived in the back apartment by herself, right?
That is so.
A working lady who worked long hours during the day and was there at night, right?
I hardly ever see her. I don't know if she came late. She worked late until 9, 10 sometimes. It was hard to get a hold of her.
Wouldn't that be pretty frightening for a lady who lived alone to have some man come cut her electricity off in the middle of the night?
Middle of the night, I don't know about middle of the night, but if you say so, maybe Miss Conway said that was the case. Well, yes, that's why I said, well, that's it, Mr. Black, and after all, he was 71-year-old man. You can't just throw laws against throwing somebody on the street, aren't there? You have to have a little bit...
Well, you have to do it right, and you did it the right way.
Well, you have to have a little compassion, too. After all, obviously, the guy had a little problem there, you know.
What you said to yourself or said to him, that's it. That's the final straw.
Well, the final straw is if you don't renew the lease. In this particular case, I said it was the best way of action.
Okay, and what you decided to do, and what you did do, was you sent him a notice that you would not be renewing his lease.
Not right away. It was about 2 months before that, before the lease would have on its own expired. So I told him right away, very ahead of time. I told him he had plenty of time to look for another place of your liking, but you really have to think about moving.
First you told him in person, right?
First in person, and then I went by the usual ways of sending this notice that his lease would not be renewed 1 month before it should have actually taken place.
Secondly, you sent him the letter that's dated July the 13th, I am not going to renew your lease.
That's correct, sir.
And by the terms of that letter you sent him, he should have moved out by August the 14th, right?
That's correct.
But he didn't.
He didn't.
You didn't make any further efforts to move him out?
Well, What kind of effort do you think I could use to move him out? Physically, or have the police come bring him, or go through the normal course of proceeding, which usually takes 2, 3, 4 months before you get somebody out? So no, I discussed the problem with him, and he said he'd been looking and he hasn't found anything yet, but he's really trying hard. I said, Mr. Black, please try a little harder, and when you do think you could come up with another place, soon.
Kind of putting you off, right?
I wouldn't call it putting off, but maybe he had problems finding another place. How about that?
Then you got a phone call from a man inquiring about whether that apartment was going to be up for rent, didn't you?
It happened just to the end of his lease, somewhere around the end of September, I believe.
Actually, it was in August, wasn't it? After you sent this, or after he was supposed to have moved out?
It was just short before he was supposed to move out. I think it was more like in September.
And this person called and just out of the blue and said, well, is the apartment going to be vacant? I might want to rent it, something of that nature.
I still like to call it the brother-in-law called me and said he heard Mr. Black would be moving and he had...
The voice sounded a lot like brother-in-law of Dorothy Signer, didn't it?
That's what it sounded like.
And he was just saying, now is he going to be moving out? Or are you going to have this apartment for rent? Or tell us about that conversation.
He said he was, Miss Signer was interested in having a friend coming down. She has, I asked if it was a female friend or a female or a male or a man friend. I think it was a female friend coming down and would be interested in the apartment vis-a-vis the form of Mr. Black's apartment. I said, that says something new to me. I said, I don't know. He has moved out yet.
Did you get the idea that perhaps Mr. Black, Morris Black, was having somebody test you to see if you were going to move him out?
Why should I get an idea like that? I didn't have any ideas.
Well, didn't you say to that person, well, I don't know what the old man is going to do. He may stay?
I didn't say, I never call him old man. I don't remember. That's your words. I call him, no, that's news to me. I said, as far as I know, Mr. Black is still in the apartment. He just sent me another check for a month's rent. That's what I said.
Okay, and so you had already made up your mind, hadn't you, that because Mr. Black, Morris Black, paid the rent always on time.
Before time.
And sometimes before time.
Not sometimes, all the time before time.
Always before time, that maybe you're not going to kick him out after all.
No, it never entered my mind. I thought it would be best for all concerned that Mr. Black find another place, but I didn't see the urgency that I had to kick him out. I had to have legal action against him. I figured he would get out eventually. He promised to find another place, and he was sincere about it, but maybe he had problems locating a place. But of course, after September, going into October, I would have to have a serious talk with him and say, well, what about it? But, you have a man who is 71 years old, and he obviously has problems, like I said earlier. You don't want to put him on the street, or do you want to be trying to threaten him with the law? I wanted to get him out peacefully.
Okay, well, when this conversation happened, when this man called and asked if this apartment was going to be vacant, you had just received another check from Mr. Black. Isn't that right?
That's right.
And the check you received from Mr. Black is the one that was dated August the 28th, and it was clearly from Mr. Black. Isn't that right?
If it says so, yes.
Well, here is my copy of it. I think it's in this group that you've already identified. It's a check dated August 28th, 01.
That's his check.
Right? And that's the check you were talking about that you just received from him.
August 28th.
Yes.
It was September we were talking about.
Well, of course you knew that. You knew in September you had just received the August 28th check.
No, I received the October check.
Mr. Dillman, I want to ask you about the August 28th check. I found it in State's Exhibit 150. It's one of the ones that you were shown. If you would, hold it there in front of you. And that is a check that by the date on it says August 2801, right?
Correct.
And it's obviously a Morris Black check, right?
That's correct.
It's written on it in several places.
Yes, sir.
It says at the top, this check is for $300, even though he doesn't need to say that. And at the bottom, it says in the for section, for rent for September 01 for the month of September, right?
That's correct.
And he even writes down below his signature, above his signature, this check is for all money I owe you in October 101, in black, correct? Have I read that correctly?
That's correct.
By the letter that you sent him, he was supposed to have moved out by August 14th, right?
Yes.
But you got this check after August the 28th, didn't you?
Yes. Well, it's usually 2 or 3 days in the mail, a few days.
And we can tell by the deposit slip that is on the same piece of paper that you deposited this check on August the 31st, right?
Right.
Now, since there's 14 days between August the 14th, when he was supposed to move out, and August the 28th, when he wrote the check, something happened in that time for him to feel secure enough to send you a check for the next month's rent.
Nothing had happened.
Well, didn't you get a phone call from someone kind of testing whether you're going to kick him out?
No, I didn't. I didn't catch a meter to the 1st of September. It was to the 1st. I didn't.
Excuse me a second. That check is for until the 1st of October, isn't it?
The 1st of October, yes.
For the whole month of September.
Well, whole month of September until the 1st of October, right.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right, now let me go to another subject. We're through with the check. Sooner after all this stuff happened, after Morris Black's body was found, after Mr. Durst had been arrested in Pennsylvania, there was a lot of publicity. Soon after that, you allowed, because the court asked you to, you allowed some investigators from my office to come to the old apartment, right?
That's correct.
I'm not talking about just recently when they came back out.
Right in the beginning.
In the very beginning. And one of the fellows that came with the investigators was a carpenter, wasn't he?
I don't remember if he said he was a carpenter.
Well, he was a fellow that was pretty handy with patching walls and taking stuff apart and so forth, right?
Well, somebody was patching something, yeah. I don't know.
You were concerned if there was any damage done by the investigators looking at the apartment, that you wanted the apartment to be put back in the same condition or better, right?
Are you talking about the when you went out the second time or the first time?
The first time.
The first time. I didn't talk to any carpenter. I was the carpenter.
Okay, we're not talking about the same thing. I know there was a time when the police went in and took a piece of the wall out of the kitchen area. Didn't they?
Quite a few things there, yes.
But the pieces of wall that the police took out was on the kitchen side of the wall. And I'm referring on Defendant's Exhibit 7. It would be the part of the wall that separates the kitchen from the living room, right?
I don't remember the wall, but they took out the framework of the door.
Well, do you remember before they took anything out, there was some blood? Tiny little blood spots on the side of the wall, on the kitchen side of the wall?
Uh-huh.
You remember that the police room part of the wall took it with them?
The police mentioned to me, well, did you find anything? Because I didn't ever see anything. Oh yeah, we found blood, and this is that.
We will let them testify about that, but the question is, did they take part of that wall, right?
I don't remember the whole wall. I remember the framework of the entrance. They took that all out.
But you do remember that they took part of the wall, not the whole wall.
What do you call part of the wall? 2 inches, 3 inches? I didn't see any major.
Well, I remember the size of it being at least this big.
Around the doorframe, maybe. Around the doorframe, maybe.
Right?
Yeah, they were just taking it out.
I'm not talking about that part. I'm talking about the time when some investigators from my office came there with permission and dug out a piece of the door frame on the living room side. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Am I correct, aren't I, that the piece that my investigators dug out was here on the living room side of the wall?
Right.
The wall that separates the kitchen from the living room. It has a passageway that we can see real clearly in this model, right?
Right.
It doesn't have a door it doesn't have a door on, it's just a passageway.
It doesn't have a door on it.
It's almost like an arch, but it's square.
Correct.
And the investigators from my office took a piece of that out and then repaired it for you, didn't they?
That is correct.
Did a nice job repairing it?
It was satisfactory.
Satisfactory enough for you to try to hire one of them?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Let's stretch a little bit. You know, I'm starting to appreciate the value of the little arguments we have. Because it breaks it up a bit. And here, that's all been removed. So 5-minute stretch. I break this
Not
up.
the recorded stuff.
We can all start arguing if you want.
Mr. Sistering?
Thank you. Morris gave you lots of noise complaints, right, Mr. Black?
Who was that?
Mr. Morris Black gave you complaints about noise and things like that.
A noise.
Noise.
Yes.
Any other tenants give you the same type of complaints in the house? Noise related to other tenants?
No.
You hadn't spent any money on that house as far as special insulation or noise reduction or anything like that, had you?
Not for the money they were paying.
Did you have any rules in your rental property, sir, regarding whether or not guns could be in there?
I never was aware that there is provisions in any of the lease contract that they have a provision for guns.
So you didn't have any?
I didn't have any.
Did you ever receive any reports from other tenants about guns going off in apartment number 2?
No.
Did you ever receive any complaints from the Galveston Police Department about shots being fired in your home?
Not in my home, in my building.
In your building at 2213K?
That's correct, no.
No? Okay. To your knowledge, were some of your tenants that were renting at the time, in September of 2001, were they at home during the day or people who had evening-type jobs?
I wouldn't know. I didn't check, and I wouldn't want to be. I didn't want them to be bothered either.
So you don't have any personal knowledge as to whether Mr. Henriquez worked or any of your other tenants worked?
Well, I was assuming that one of them would be working because of the Henriquez family. He would be working during the day, and she would be working in the evening or at night.
You described Norris as being irritating and difficult, correct? Those are your words?
Well, that was just a professional observation.
Personal
A personal observation.
Would you agree that, well, let me ask you this. He lived at your property, 2213 Avenue K, for almost a year, did he not?
Yes.
Did you ever see him, or did you ever have personal observation or interaction with him where you felt him to be violent towards you in any way?
Mr. Black didn't have any wholesome figure in the first place. He was a man complaining about heart problems, and no, except for raising his voice, which I attributed to maybe bad hearing, he never threatened me in any way, or did I have the feeling that he wanted to do harm to me in any form.
Let me ask you this. Do you recall if in August of 2001, whether or not the brother-in-law of the defendant called and said he was going to be in and out of apartment 2 for some time?
The brother-in-law was supposed to have called me and let me know he would be in and out.
I'm asking if you have any recollection of any call like that.
No.
Okay. In 2001, directing you back to 2001, do you recall having seen Ms. Signer, the defendant, in that apartment all during the early part of 2001 up until September?
Only in the early part.
Only in the early part?
When the apartment first was leased to her, I saw her, as I said already several times, I saw her about 2 times or 3 times. That was the only time I saw her, and that was in the beginning. Later on, I didn't ever see her again.
Regarding the diagram that's been introduced, the 2 defendants' exhibits and its model, do you know, can you speak with certainty as to whether or not the locations indicated for the table, the chair, and the stove on these diagrams are the same as they were on September 28th of 2001?
Pretty close.
Were you in the apartment on September 28th of 2001?
What day was it?
September 28th of 2001. Were you in apartment number 2 on that date?
Is that when Officer Gonzalez was over there, or was that another time? No, I don't remember being there.
Okay. Do you know whether the stove was on September 28th of 2001?
Well, I know when I first came into the apartment, when I opened it up, Officer Gonzalez was there.
The stove was Hold on a second. The stove was in the kitchen,
The stove was in the kitchen, and the restroom was supposed to be where it was.
and I'm not trying to get tricky or anything, but I'm just asking you. This has been introduced as a diagram as to scale.
That is correct.
When did you let the defendant's team in to make these measurements, to make this scale diagram? Was that recently or not?
Well, just recently,
This year, 2003?
yeah, they wanted to go and have a look at it, take some measurements.
And this looks like, what is your testimony regarding the placement of this table and this chair and this bed and this stove?
It's pretty much close to where it was when I entered the apartment.
When you entered the apartment, and when you entered the apartment, did you see any dead body laying on the floor?
Not to my recollection.
My point is, you can't tell us exactly how things were on the day that a body would have been laying on the floor. Is that correct?
I would see a body, If there was a body, I would have seen that, and I would have seen blood splattered all over it. But when I came in there, it looked just like it always looked.
Let's go to this telephone call that you were asked about on cross-examination. Do you have a recollection of the brother-in-law calling at some point and giving you knowledge of a friend of Miss Signer that wanted to rent Morris Black's apartment?
Did I have an exact recollection, or as close? Pretty close, yeah.
It was suggested to you that call came sometime in August. When do you remember that call coming, Mr. Dillman?
It was after they had already found, I think, no, I don't remember exactly what day it was. It was probably was when I was supposed to be.
I don't know, I'm asking you.
I didn't keep any timing or anything, of course. Maybe you should ask my wife, because she was more up to it to write everything down, because I never thought it was important that I have to write things down.
Why did you find it unusual that a person was calling and trying to rent that apartment?
It was because I just received a check.
Had you received September's check or October's check?
It was October's.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Any more questions?
You didn't get a check in October.
It was a money order.
It was a money order.
It was money either way.
The check that you received was a check from Morris Black.
The one you showed me in August, but go ahead.
As far as the stove is concerned, the stove is in the same place that it's always been in the house. When we went in recently, and when Mr. Durst or Dorothy Signer or brother-in-law lived there, the stove was in the exact same place that it is now. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all.
Anything further?
We're agreeing that the connection for the stove was on that same wall. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
But you cannot tell us exactly where the stove was on September 28th of 2001, can you? Other than if it was connected, it would have been against this wall. Would that be a fair assessment?
Fair.
And just to make this perfectly clear, I think, you received a payment for October from Morris Black. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it your previous testimony that you had received that check before the call came from the brother-in-law?
That is correct.
I don't have any further questions.
Anything else, Mr. DeGuerin?
Did anybody ever move that stove? That stove's been in the same place for years, hasn't it?
No, you cannot move it because we have a line back there, and you only can pull it either way so far and still have gas.
Thank you. That's all.
Anything else, Mr. Sistrunk?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Dillman, you're excused.
All right, with that, let's now take our 15-minute regular recess until 3:15. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form